hear me?
It's Lucy.
Great.
It's Lucy. Good to see you.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. We're going to have, I hope, a lot of fun talking baseball tonight. And for those of you who might find it boring or it would put you to sleep, Lindsay has a new side job, and it's called Rent a Pillow. So if you get a little drowsy, there she is with a pillow. Oh. Well, having fun with baseball, having fun is the deal here. I do want to tip the cap to Scott McNabb, who is a collector of baseball player nicknames, and anyway, he sort of put me into these things. Well, this is a makeup program. It was rained out, or stormed out the first time, and Charlie Brown and I had regrets, but Dave Anson made the right call, no question about it. And tonight we're going to see if we can have some laughs with Snoopy. Laughs, smiles, grins, whatever it takes. So, what does a nickname do? Well, it shortens and saves on your vocal cords. It shortens the name. Theodore to Ted, Napoleon to Nap. It also, sometimes it just sounds right. There's a reverberation. Virgil Trucks could be nobody else but fire trucks, right? And Johnny Hop is hippity hop. And there's downtown Ollie Brown. It also tends to accentuate skills, origins, appearance, or habits, and sometimes sarcastically, but most of the time true to the player's performances. Brooks Robinson was known as the human vacuum cleaner. No ball got by third base for the Orioles. Bob Feller, well, you all know Bob Feller, the heater from Van Meter, where he came from. James Vaughn, 6'4", 215 pounds, was called Hippo. And I'm going to try and avoid those kind of nicknames because you could go on and on with, nicknames about how people appear, and it's not always flattering. Clarence Blethyn, oh my goodness. Can I say that word now with new laws in Iowa? Oh. Well, not to be worried. It is the tobacco that Clarence chewed. Now, there's another story about Clarence. He didn't, as you can see, he only played in the majors a couple of years, but he played a lot of minor league ball, even into his later years. And for whatever reason, he lost his teeth. Now, some say it's the chewing. Others said he had them taken out so he would look a little more angry as a pitcher. And others simply said, what was the third thing that they, that it saved his pitching arm, if you can imagine that. If you don't have teeth, I don't know, but anyway, that's what he said. So in 1933, after he'd done his stint in the majors, he's playing in the minor leagues. And he had his dentures, and when he batted, he put them in his back pocket. So he hit a ball, raced around first, slid into second, and jumped up. Yipe! He was the only ball player they know of that got bit in the butt by his own teeth. So, now Snuffy Sternwans, some of you old-timers will remember, he actually won the batting title in 1945, the American League batting title, with a very minimum kind of batting average. But anyway, George Sternweiss got his nickname when he reported to AAA Newark and walked into the clubhouse with a chew in his mouth and a cigar smoking at the same time. And somebody said, the only thing you're missing is snuff. And so he became Snuffy. Okay, some of you, I just couldn't resist telling you this story about Hank Arft and the St. Louis Browns. Although he has a different cap, kind of a sportier one. But anyhow, he played first base for the St. Louis Browns, the perennial cellar dwellers in the American League for many years. And Hank came up to the majors in 1948, middle of the season, and went on a 12-game hitting streak, including a couple nice long balls, home run, triple. And the fans got all excited. Let me tell you, there wasn't much for the Browns fans to get excited about. This was exciting. So they came out early for batting practice, and they started chanting his name. Arf! 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 So what did his teammates call him? Hank Bow Wow Arf. So that is still one of my favorite nicknames of all time. There are others named after dogs, but I won't go into that. Well, here's a more contemporary guy you probably know, the Spaceman. Bill Spaceman Lee played for the Red Sox, the Expos, and the third photo is a photo put on one of the books he wrote, which sort of mimics a spaceman. And we'll get to the fourth photo here in a minute. He was certainly an eccentric, but anybody's imagine, oh boy, I have some really good spaceman quotes here I want to share with you. He was something else. He said, quote, baseball's a very simple game. All you have to do is sit on your butt, spit tobacco, and nod at the stupid things your manager says. He boiled it down to something pretty simple, didn't he? This is another spaceman quote. The other day they asked me about mandatory drug testing. I said I believed in drug testing a long time ago. All through the 60s, I tested everything. Well, not only did he pitch pretty well in the major leagues, and he finished his career in Montreal, he and his wife settled in Nova Scotia for a period of time. But then he got this nutty idea about running for president in the U.S. And he adopted a party that was active in Canada called the Rhinoceros Party, and they used this symbol. It's a Durer woodcut, as I understand. Now, you didn't think you'd get highbrow art tonight, did you? But there it is. So he ran for president on the platform. His slogan was, no guns, no butter, both can kill. So he wasn't successful, of course. He had to move to Burlington, Vermont in order to be a citizen again for a while. Well, anyway, he went on to run for governor twice, I think. He ran for governor of New Hampshire and got all of 3% of the vote at that time. So his political career wasn't quite up to snuff. He co-authored four books, and they're all kind of smart alecky books, and so on. He was rebellious in the sense that whenever the ball club he was with, the Red Sox or Montreal, would trade one of his friends, he'd quit. That if they're going to let my buddy go, I'm not playing for you, that sort of thing. Well, who anointed these players with their nicknames? Well, Dusty Baker. You all know Dusty from the fact that he has managed the world champion team last year. His real name is Johnny B. Baker Jr., but his mother called him Dusty because that's how he looked when he came in from playing. Preschool to years. Now, teammates named Babe Ruth, George Herman Ruth, because they saw him as being favored by the owner of the then Baltimore Orioles. This is the 19th century Baltimore Orioles. And, well, this is the early 20th century Baltimore Orioles. And they thought he was being favored, so they said he's Dunn's Babe. And that's how the name came about. Rival fans, Stan the Man Musial, the guy I grew up idolizing as a player, was always knocking the ball out of the park at Ebbets Field, Brooklyn. He'd have wonderful high batting averages and lots of home runs and so forth. So the fans, Brooklyn fans, would see him coming and they say, oh, there's the man. And Bob Broad, one of the sports writers for St. Louis, caught on to that, and that's how it spread. So he was named by the rival fans. The press, Mr. Tiger Kaline, was by the press of Detroit. And you remember David Letterman got into the nicknaming game? Terry Big Tub of Goo Forster. It was as early in Letterman's late night career, and he saw Forster, who was not small. He was 6'3", 270 pounds, and made a comment about him. But Forster sort of got the last laugh because Letterman invited him on his show, and so he introduces Forster, and Forster's walking out. He has a sandwich. And Letterman says, what do you got there? And he says, I got the David Letterman deli sandwich on my way here. Oh. Yeah, he says it's got a lot of tongue in it. Letterman took it as in fact, the line may have been given to him by Letterman. Well, let's see who we got next. Well, we're going to go a bit to the history of professional baseball very quickly, folks. This is the time to get your pillow. But anyway, the Cincinnati Red Stockings of 1869 were the first all-professional baseball team. They toured the country from Boston to San Francisco and won every game, 57 wins, 0 losses. And they got an invitation to the White House. Now the question is, who was the president who issued this first? Now, I've sprung this on other people, so any wild guesses? Grant is it? U.S. Grant. Probably because he was a native of Ohio as well, but also, I guess, something of a sports fan. And it worked for him. So, of the 9 players you saw in that photo, 4 had nicknames. And the first one, Mac McVeigh, was born in Iowa, on a farm near Montrose, Iowa. He went on to play with other teams. After this team broke up, the Red Stockings, they carried forward as a club, but the manager was partial to players who were sober. And so he took the sober players to Boston, and McVeigh was one of those. The first baseman was Charles Bushel Basket Gould. Now, in those years, they had no gloves, no masks, only the bats that you saw in that previous. You can see how long they are, too. They almost look like brooms handles in some ways. But because Gould was good at catching the ball and from the infielders, he was called Bushel Basket. Innocent Fred Waterman, this is a sarcastic, it turns out it's a sarcastic. he wasn't so innocent. He was a carouser as well. Asa Brainerd was called Count because he liked fancy dress. He would get himself spiffed up before the games. And of course, with the record that he had, he was very important to those 57 victories. They also, as a play on his name, Asa, they called him AC. And to this day, the best pitcher on any team is called the Ace, derived from AC. Now, the first team I rooted for was the 46 St. Louis Cardinals. I came home from country school. My dad was not out in the field harvesting corn in the mid-October afternoon, but he was listening to the radio. What are you listening to, Dad? Ball game, he says. Who's playing? Cardinals and the Red Sox. And who are you cheering for, Dad? The Cardinals. And I've been a Cardinal fan ever since. But that lineup, the 8 players, 8 position players, 7 of them were known by their nicknames. You can go through them. Stan the Man, we've already referenced him. Alfred Red Shandiest was at second. Marty Slats Marion, so called because of his very slender and tall build. Whitey Karowski, what was under his hat, got that name. Now, I put Forsack Dusack down to give you the rhythm that gave him his name. But the first professional game he played, he hit a home run. So his teammates said, good old Forsack, which is what you call a home run. It's 4 bases, 4 sacks. Harry the Hat Walker was in center field, who just fiddled with his cap out in the field and especially at bat. So he got the nickname the Hat. Country was Eno Slaughter, who grew up in rural North Carolina and never quite fit into the urban culture, so all his teammates called it Country. Joe was the cat. Anybody have any idea who Joe was? Exactly. Garagiola. Joe Garagiola went on to get it and make his name and other things as well as baseball. And I always thought he made a lot of bucks off of his friendship with Yogi Berra, but that's another story. The starting pitcher and the hero of the series for the Cardinals was Harry the Cat Burkeen, so called because of the way he pounced on bunts, like a cat. Now this is one I didn't know before. I looked it up. Murray Dixon was called by his manager the Thomas Edison of the mound because he invented new pitches all the time. And old Alfie was Alpha Brazel, who broke into the major leagues 5 or 6 years later than most players. He was in his late 20s. Bees was Johnny Beasley. And the cork was Ted Wilkes. Now, he was the relief pitcher who put a stop on the rallies, so they called him the cork. Now, there is a poem, 1987 poem. It was published in the New York Times magazines where I first saw it, and certainly not at that time, that's made up entirely of baseball player nicknames. Almost 200 of them. And this is the first stanza only. But it gives you kind of a feel for what he was doing. Catfish, mudcat, ducky, coot. The babe, the barber, the blade, the brat. Windy, dummy, Gabby, hoot. Big train, big six, big Ed, fat. I like sing-song poems, don't you? Yeah. And that's it. The ones that I have emboldened, their nicknames I'll enter into the talk at some time. So I searched for others that might help them out. Some rhymes, rhythms and rhymes. Jim Abadabba Tobin, over here on the left. He said Abadabba, sort of like magicians say Abadabba, whenever something special would happen. Steve Bye Bye Balboni. Some of you seen him play. I know Jim and I saw him years ago in Kansas City. William Heine Miney. Those of you who grew up in towns that have German settlements will recognize the Heine as well as the Miney. It may be Heine, Mine, I'm not sure. Emil Hillbilly Bill Dilly. Wouldn't you like to be the radio announcer? And Hazen Kai Kyler. He is a Hall of Famer. He's very good. And I put his photo on the right there because, although you can't see it, he signed autographs, including this photo, with Kai rather than Hazen. So he must have adopted that. There's also the story that he may have had a speech impediment as a boy, and that might have contributed to the repetitive nickname. Well, I gotta catch up here. Okay. Oh, we've got some more of these. I think you'll recognize this one, the second one. Fred Creepy Crespi was nicknamed because he sort of creeped, he's an infielder, creeped up on the ball. Creepy Crespi. Now, Bill Goober Zuber, you must have eaten at the Homestead Inn, Zuber's Homestead. All right, here's the deal. I discovered in doing the research that if you have a signed card, a bubblegum card, Bill Zuber signed, it's worth about $5,000. Because he played for the Yankees and because somebody wants to fill the full set of Yankee signatures, you could make yourself, I expect a 10% finder's fee. Ron Pruitt. Oh, some of you remember Marvelous Marv Throneberry of the New York Mets and Ding-a-ling Dane Clay, whoever he was. Okay, 3 guys named Catfish, 2 of which are in the Hall of Fame. Bill Clem, some say was the greatest umpire ever because he set certain standards for umpiring, and that was the reason that they gave him such high accolades. He was an umpire for a long time, as you can see. But the players thought that his mouth looked like a catfish mouth. And so they would, among themselves, call him Catfish. But if Clem ever heard a whisper or any recognition of that name, out they'd go. One day, a guy came up to the plate and he drew a fish in with his feet. He was gone. He was gone. Now, Metkovich earned the Catfish nickname because on an off day he went fishing, caught a catfish, put it in the boat, stepped on it, cut his foot, it became infected, and he was out 10 days. So his teammates called him Catfish from then on. Not to feel sorry for George Metkovich, though. He was in 30 or 40 Hollywood films. And he said he was opposite, he didn't have many speaking parts, but he was opposite some of the most beautiful women in the world. So I do not feel sorry for you, Catfish. The fellow on the right's probably the one you heard most about, Jim Hunter. Now, Jim grew up in North Carolina, and when he came to the A's, when they were in Kansas City, the owner was Charles O. Finley. You've probably heard of this guy if you follow baseball. Or if you didn't, if you drove on I-90 through Indiana, there was a barn that had A's, just like the A's on Jim's cap. There was a barn with A's on, and that was Charles O. Finley's farm. Well, he was quite a character, and when Hunter reported to the Kansas City A's, Finley sat him down and said, you're a catfish. What do you mean? You skipped school when you were a kid and went fishing for catfish. Well, he thinly fabricated the whole story and put it out to the press, and so he became catfish hunter for the rest of his career, which was a very productive career, as a matter of fact. Now, umpires got into the game, Bill Clem did, and here's a guy with William Byron. He just set up for nicknames, right? His fellow umpires called him Lord Byron, which seemed pretty appropriate. Some of the players called him Wild Bill, but Singing Bill, or the Hummingbird, was the one that caught on because he would sing couplets in response to what's happening in the game. I wrote down a couple of them here. One he used frequently with rookie batters who would strike out, called strikeout. You have to learn when you're older, you can't hit with a bat on your shoulder. The umpire would say that to him. And Muggsy McGraw, John McGraw, who was a famous hot-headed manager for the New York Giants for many, many years, would come out to argue about anything. And when he did, actually he and Byron became very good friends. It turns out off the field they were just buddies, but anyway, on the field, of course, they weren't. And McGraw had come charging out, and this is what Byron's here. Here comes McGraw, here comes McGraw to the tune of London Bridge. No, wait a minute. Here comes McGraw to the tune of Here Comes the Bride. I got that wrong. And Casey Stengel once got thrown out of a game by Byron, and this is what he said. To the clubhouse you must go, my fair Casey. And that was how he earned the nickname of Singing Bill. Now, some of you may remember this song. It made the charts in 1981, made it as high as 27 on Billboard, I think. And I love the song. I've just resurrected it on my playlist, but it's full of nicknames. But the question I'm going to pose to you is Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. How many of those are nicknames? Well, I gave one away, didn't I? That's not quite fair. So you got a free one, okay? But we're talking baseball, Klazuski, Campanella. Talking baseball, the man and Bobby Fella, the Scooter, the Barber, and the Nuke. They knew them all from Boston to Dubuque. Boy, you're desperate for something to rhyme with Nuke, I guess, so you pull out Dubuque. Especially Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. Well, the man, we've heard about that. The Scooter was Phil Rizzuto, short, very short shortstop, and he scooted around the diamond called Scooter. The Barber was Sal Magley. Remember him? He always had a 5 o'clock shadow. Looked like he needed a barber. But he got the name because he would throw the ball very close to the chins of the batter, give them a shave. He was called the Barber. And the Nuke was Don Newcomb, of course, a big, very effective pitcher for the Dodgers. Okay, Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. Well, Willie Mays was his birth name. So we'll skip over that. Willie something Mays is on his birth certificate. And Mickey Mantle is on his birth certificate. He was nicknamed the Commerce Comet and the Mick, but he got the name Mickey because his father, who was, wait a minute, I got his name down here. Mutt was his father's nickname, Mutt Mantle. I guess if you had that, you wouldn't feel bad about giving your kid the name Mickey, because his favorite player, Mutt's favorite player in 1931 was Gordon Mickey Cochran. Now, isn't it ironic that he gave the birth name from somebody's nickname? So that is how Mickey got named. Now, these are nicknames from favorite foods of the player. Mickey Fruit Loops Tettleton. He said he got all his power from Fruit Loops. But the other interesting thing is Mickey, as Mickey Mantle, Mickey Tettleton grew up in Oklahoma, played for Oklahoma State University, and his birth name is Mickey after Mickey Mantle. So the story goes on. You probably travel through Oklahoma, you'd find dozens of Mickeys running around. Wade Boggs, the chicken man, had fried chicken before every meal, before every game he played. It was superstition as much as anything. Boggs is another story. I mean, you could tell stories about it. And Jim Palmer, he's also a lot of stories on the far right. Now, just to add a little bit here, Wade Boggs and Jim Palmer are both in the Hall of Fame. They were great players without question. And Palmer, you may remember, used to model underwear. And he sort of got some crap for that, but he went into the Hall of Fame. Actually, I think he's still doing the color for some of the Baltimore Oriole games, and he is really good at it. His life story is an interesting story as well. Well, he got into the Hall of Fame in 1991. He was at that time, a period of time has to lapse before you can go in the Hall of Fame. So he retired in 84, went into the Hall of Fame in 91. He had this crazy idea of making a comeback. And so he went to spring training to see if he could get his fastball up and his control to the point where he could pitch again. And let's see, age 46, for crying out loud. He's almost eligible for Oak Knoll. He's trying to get a major league team. So one of the coaches at the University of Miami was walking by as Jim was warming up, and he says, quote, "You'll never get into the Hall of Fame with those mechanics." And Palmer said, "I'm already in the Hall of Fame." So he had the last laugh. Choo Choo. Choo Choo Coleman. Named at an early age by his peers for scooting around. He's fast, ran very fast. That may have had something to do with it. He also is said to have had a speech impediment, which may have promulgated the name Choo 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 Choo, something like that. And he only played for last place teams. One ought to honor these people who are willing to tolerate playing for last place teams. The Phillies in 61 and the Mets, who were a new team at the time, 62, 63. Well, the Mets broadcaster, Ralph Kiner, in 1962, when the Mets were so bad, and he tried to increase the audience for the Mets, both on air and in the ballpark, by interviewing each player on the roster. And Choo Choo, very timid guy, didn't say very much. He got to Choo Choo in his list of players to interview, and so he's having trouble getting to say anything. So he says to Choo Choo, "What's your wife's name and what's she like?" Choo Choo says, "Mrs. Coleman, and she likes me, bub." Duke Snyder was on that team. He finished his career, as did Willie Mays, with the Mets, mostly as a box office draw rather than as a skilled player. But Duke was commenting to a newspaper and said, Coleman doesn't know anybody's name. And so he said, and so Duke says, Choo Choo, do you know me? Yeah, he says, you're number 4. These are players who were nicknamed for vocalizations of various sorts. The guy on the left is Huey Jennings, again, a Hall of Famer. But when he was a manager after his playing days, and he was third base coach, he would have this, "Ee-yah!" And that the fans remembered it, and this is the antic he would go through at the time. It even got onto a baseball card. It was that well known. Charlie Sea Lion Hall, well, you can imagine what his voice was like. George Foghorn Myatt, he played in the 40s and 50s. Charles Gabby Street, well, that would be frequency of talking, if nothing else. Now, Gabby was a catcher and also a manager in the 30s and 40s. And when I was on this Iowa farm, and I would put my finger on the aerial of the radio to pull in KMOX. When I was very young, and the first few times I did it, I'd get Harry Carey, which is a treat. He was in his sober years then, I think. But I'd get Harry Carey, and his sidekick was Gabby Street. So that was, and Leo the Lip, also in the Hall of Fame, probably because he was a manager, although he did play shortstop. And he was as famous for being the roommate for Babe Ruth as anything else. That you can imagine those two together. Same nickname, several players. Death defying things. Often it's given to 3 outfielders at very different periods in history. Any ball that goes to the outfield, they'll get. Death defying things. The Crab, 2 second basemen, both in the Hall of Fame, and nicknamed for perhaps the way they approached a ground ball, but almost certainly for their personality. They were grumpy and tough to get along with, well documented. Evers was the second baseman in the famous double play combination of Tinker to Evers to Chance. Tinker and Evers never spoke to each other after about 2 years playing together, and they were together for 10 or 12 years. They just didn't like each other for some reason. Well, obviously, personality isn't a qualification for the Hall of Fame. Okay, 19th century players nicknamed Orator. Now, I think I've spoken of the first one here, George Orator Schaefer, who was called Orator because he talked to himself all the time. He's talking away, and it irritated his teammates, so they put him out in right field, so they didn't have to listen to it. The other one, Orator O'Rourke, was, in addition to being a very skilled baseball player, was a skilled arguer and got Orator as a result of that. And he wound up about halfway through his major league career getting a law degree from Yale. And in the late 19th century, the 1890s, there was a big labor movement in baseball. The players were not happy with the salaries they were getting, and they were not happy with the reserve clause, which bound them to playing with the same team year after year after year. And so they had the Players League in 1890, and Orator O'Rourke was big in that movement.
He lived a long time.
Yeah, he did. He was. Now here are 2 Dougs nicknamed Eye Chart, for reasons that are evident to all of you, I'm sure. Both Dougs. The first one is pronounced, I think, Goosh. Doug Goosh, a catcher for the San Diego Padres for 4 years. And Doug Mankiewicz, now he played for the Twins. I vaguely remember when he was, Halsey Hall was telling about Mankiewicz in the 90s. These are two guys with the same nickname. The Earl of Snohomish. Turns out it's a town in Washington State. And they were both named Earl Averill, Earl Torgerson, hence they became the Earl of Snohomish. I'll learn how to pronounce that yet. But oh, here's the hometown name that a lot of you will recognize. Wilmer Vinegar Ben Mizell. Short career, actually, because his arm got messed up. He served for a while in the Korean War. And when he came back, he never had the fastball again, for whatever reason. But I found this, and it says his baseball card calls him Wilmer, his first name. He signs his name David, his middle name. So why not call him Vinegar Ben? Exactly. Vinegar Ben was a pretty fair pitcher for a while. And his second minor league city that he went to, it was in North Carolina. I think it was High Point, but I'm not sure. And then in the off-season, he moved to North Carolina. And he was there, and well, there's an intervening story I want to tell you. He got the name Vinegar Bend from Vinegar Bend, Alabama. Technically, he didn't live in Vinegar Bend. He lived across the river in Mississippi, but he always adopted that name. And I guess he may have gone to high school there, I'm not sure. So when he was at Houston, pitching for the Houston Buffaloes, they decided as a promotion, they knew about Vinegar Bend and the little town. It was, like less than 200. So the Houston management invited all of the residents of Vinegar Bend to come for a Vinegar Bend night at the ballpark. And they got a busload of 30 or something. They asked Vinegar Bend, he says, geez, they must have got some from the suburbs. So, as you can see, he retired at age 32 in 1963, and was living in North Carolina, and started in county politics and the like, and he wound up in 1968 elected to Congress as a representative of that district in North Carolina. He was reelected and then defeated in the his second attempt to be reelected, ran again the following time and lost again. So he was 2-2. He won 2, he lost 2 elections. But he was in Congress for a while. And then after he was out of Congress, the Republican administrations had him in one of the cabinet, or not the cabinet, but in one of the government offices. I've forgotten which one it was. I think it had to do with conservation and the like. But that was Vinegar Bend. He, boy, I tell you, we Cardinal fans were really excited when he came out. He was supposed to be the left-handed Busy D. Well, here's another nickname after the hometown, the Southpaw from Pawpaw, Michigan. And that nickname was assigned by the Tigers announcer. The Tigers announcer was one. He also went by the Sabbath Smasher and Sunday Charlie because he hit so many home runs in Sunday games. That's how they. Well, here's some ugly and sometimes hurtful nicknames. Rube. You ever call somebody or hear somebody called Rube? Usually in the turn of yes. The turn of the century, the 19th into the 20th century, it was a common derogatory phrase for a country boy. He was a rube. Dummy for players who had no hearing. Chief. Every Native American baseball player was Chief. Mo. Every Jewish player was called Mo. And Nig, I don't think I want to get into why that was used because I'm not that confident of the story. Now, we also had the ethnic nicknames, some of which were worn with pride and others were insulting. Irish, Swede, Germany, Frenchy, Mad Russian, Mad Hungarian, Dutch, Flying Scot, Flying Dutchman. But a couple of these have happy endings, which I'm sure we all prefer. William Hoy was called Dummy because he had lost his hearing as a child. But when he was called Dummy, he didn't mind. He even signed baseballs, William Dummy Hoy. He was proud of it. And he made quite a name for himself in the community of those who didn't have hearing. He became quite a leader. And his playing led to some important inventions in our game. On the right is a player in the 1905 World Series sliding back into third base. And the gesture by the coach, the third base coach, is safe. When Dummy played, and I'll call him Dummy because he liked the name, he couldn't hear any call. The umpire would shout out, he didn't hear it. Umpire would say strike, he didn't hear it. So when he was at bat, and the ball would come in, it was a called pitch, either a ball or a strike. He didn't know what the umpire said. But the third base coach developed a system where he told him, strike, ball. And therefore, the system that we've used ever since was invented in order to accommodate Dummy Hoy. The same was true of safe and out. They were physical gestures that he could see and knew what was going on. So we owe a lot to Dummy Hoy. There's a movement to get him in the Hall of Fame because he had a pretty good career. Or not maybe the career that some of these other people have flashed on the screen, but he was a more than journeyman player. So Myron Mo Grabowski. He picked a bad time and place to be born. He was born in Poland in 1935 to Jewish parents. Now we all know what's going on in Poland about that. Fortunately, his mother was an American citizen, and she packed him up and brought him to the U.S. when he was about 2, and his father followed shortly after, so they were safe in Connecticut. I guess as safe as you could be in Connecticut anyway, but they were in Connecticut. And he became a doggone good ball player as a high school player and as a college player. And the Cubs signed him to a bonus contract, which meant they gave him a pretty good sum of money to sign the contract for them. And he played for the Cubs in the 50s. He and a guy named Dick Drott, who also was a bonus baby, were the hope of the Cubs. They were young, they threw fast and effectively, and wouldn't you know, they both got arm trouble. And they were soon left the Cubs because they couldn't get people out, they just couldn't throw fast enough. But Mo landed on his feet because he became a bullpen pitcher. And a coach named Eddie Lopat took him aside and taught him a few things, and he became a very effective, though mixed results, but a very effective relief pitcher for several teams, including Baltimore and Kansas City. But his claim to fame was he was a prankster. I mean, he gave a hot foot to the baseball commissioner at an all-star game. stuck the match in the shoe, had a trail of lighter fluid where he was seated, lit a match, and poof! He said he never saw anybody jump so high as this. He'd bring live snakes into the locker room, wrapped around his neck. And some of the players, you can just, anytime you get 30, 40 people in one room, you're going to have some people with snake phobia. And sure enough, a couple of those guys just hated it. He put goldfish in the opponent's water cooler. Can you imagine going for a cup of water in the middle of the game and you see the fish going? Now, this could have been revenge, but his teammates had him arrested for cruelty to animals. And they didn't tell him it was a gag until he was at the police station. And then they said, it's just a, you know. But his crackerjack stunt, I think, anyway, was when he was in the bullpen. Now, for those of you who aren't terribly familiar with that, the reserve pitchers and the relief pitchers are in what they call a bullpen, where they warm up before they come into the game. And Mo was a relief pitcher, so he was in the bullpen for Kansas City. But he had recently been traded from Baltimore, the team they were playing, and knew a lot of the players on the Baltimore team, of course. So the game is going on, Baltimore's ahead, and the pitcher's doing well. But Mo, sitting in the Kansas City bullpen, gets on the phone. Somehow he figured out the number that you dial to get to the Baltimore bullpen. The bullpen coach picks up the phone, and on the other end is Mo, imitating the Baltimore manager. Get so-and-so up and get him ready to go. And so the guy is up and warming up. Meanwhile, the pitcher in the game is throwing a shutout. Why would you have anybody? They just, and pretty quick, they knew who it was. It was Mo. Second generation nicknames. Stan the Man Unusual. Don Stanhouse became Stan the Man Unusual. And George Herman Ruth, the Sultan of SWAT, that was one of several nicknames he had, to Mo Solomon, the Rabbi of SWAT. Now there's a story behind each of those. Here's Don Stanhouse pitching for the Baltimore Orioles with a carefully selected color of his hair and his mustache. It seems to match the uniform, and he had a scream that he'd let out just before the game started, and he was a funny guy anyway. Now the Mo Solomon story is one I've never heard before. I love it when I got into it. John McGraw, I talked about him earlier, was in 1923 was the New York Giants manager, and the manager was in charge of acquiring players as much as managing them on the field. And McGraw was really nervous because across the river at Yankee Stadium, the new stadium, George Herman Ruth was knocking the cover off the ball, and all the fans were going to see him. So McGraw said, if I could just find a Jewish player, I could get all these Jewish fans into the Polo Grounds to watch the Giants. So he scoured the country for a good Jewish player. And he found out in Hutchinson, Kansas, a ball player, an first baseman who hit 49 home runs and set a new record for the most home runs in the minor leagues at that time, 49. So he got Mose Solomon into New York City, and when he announced this acquisition, he called him the Rabbi of SWAT. Well, Mose played all of 10 games and he was done. He just couldn't hit well enough to stick around. Now it's your turn. I've got some players' names, and I want to see if you can fill in the nickname that that you see seems to make sense. How about Gary Bell?
Ding-a-ling.
Close. Ding dong. Ding dong. Very good, John. Roy Weatherly.
Thunderstorm.
Close. Again.
Storm.
Cloudy. Stormy. Stormy Weatherly. William Parrott.
Pollen.
Got it. Paul. Yeah, Paul. Bill Campbell.
Soup.
Soup. Got it. Frank Viola.
Sweet music.
Sweet music. You got it. Oh, there's a Twins fan. I should have known. Thank you. And Frank Bird.
Tweety.
Tweety, no? Dodo. How to get Frank riled up. Howard Johnson. Close. Same. Hojo. Right. Somebody said Hojo. Mac Jones. Mac.
Donald.
No, that's good. John, you're on it tonight. I don't. No. Mac the Knife Jones. James Rhodes. Dusty. Yeah, okay. Bob Duliva. Bob Duliva. Ak Duliva. Oh. Here are some of my favorite nicknames. I'm going to go through about 7 of them. Losing pitcher. How'd you like to have that one? Hugh, losing pitcher, okay. And he did lose twice as many as he won, so it wasn't. Here's his career record. He just 1 loss short of twice as many losses. Twinkle Toes Bosco. Now, this is a great story. You may have seen a documentary about Ron LaFleur. He got that nickname from his teammates on the Jepsen, Michigan prison team. He, at 21, was convicted of robbery and was in the prison. His teammates were so impressed with his speed, they called him this, but one of the teammates had some outside connection, and the word got out to the Tigers that this guy is a ball player. And the manager, Billy Martin, sobered up, and he went to see him play and agreed that he was a good ball player, and he eventually wound up as a very good player for the Detroit Tigers with a special nickname. Vlad the Impaler Guerrero Sr. This guy had a reputation for hitting any ball pitched to him. Doesn't matter if it was 3 inches off the ground or 2 feet over his head. He'd just swing at it, and more often than not, connected. Was a very good hitter in those years. Now he's probably most famous for his son who plays, is he with San Diego? I think San Diego. Or maybe it's Toronto. I didn't look it up. But Vlad, short for Vladimir, got a nickname from a 15th century Romanian ruler, Vlad the Impaler, also known as Vlad Dracula. So, and here's a, oh, sure, it's a newspaper photo, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, here's one of my favorites. Mark Scrabble Zepchen. He earned the nickname, don't you think? Now, you need to have a blank in order to spell the name with 2 Z's. But it's 30 points right here, independent of whether it's on multiple letter or word count. So you could probably get up to at least 100, 120 if you had it on the right spot on the board. I haven't worked that one out yet. But he was a relief pitcher with the Cardinals in 2011 when they went to the World Series. Mike Hargrove, the human rain delay. Anybody remember this guy? Because these are contemporaries here. In our lifetime, let's put it that way. Here is all the gyrations he would go through before he would step into the plate to bat. Helmet, his belt. Now he's fussing with his batting gloves in those two, in both of those. The human rain delay. Dennis Oil Can Boyd. Now that's a lot of people know this nickname, but the derivation of it is kind of puzzling. It's not this kind of can, it's that kind of can, because in Meridian, Mississippi, where he grew up, beer was called oil. So he got the nickname oil can from beer cans that he had consumed. Oh, and this is an all-time favorite. Pronk. Travis Pronk Hafner. We'll get into some of the other things. But it was a hybrid between two observations of teammates when he first played in the spring training. Project was something, because he was a young player and he had promise. Project, and the other was donkey because of the way he ran. So Pronk came out. And a confectionery in Cleveland came up with a candy bar with his name on it, the Pronk Bar. And Sykeston, North Dakota, all 150 citizens, are proud of Pronk. They don't put Pronk on the sign, they just put Travis on the sign. And of course, snow on the ground helps when they identify it as North Dakota. Well, I'm going to wind up with my favorite funny guy in all of baseball. Oh, good timing, Dave. Herman Germany Schaefer. He called himself Germany, and then when World War I broke out, thought that wasn't the best nickname to have, so he switched to Liberty. Remember how sauerkraut became Liberty Cabbage? Well, this is Liberty Schaefer. And he was a second baseman for Detroit and Washington. And here he is feeding a tin can to a goat before a game. And here he is doing a high wire act on the foul line. And he had all sorts of antics like that. He's a very bright guy. In addition to that, he, prior to the 1908 World Series, I think it was 08, yeah, 08, he was with Detroit. And a little side thing, he was the only player on the Detroit team that could get along with Ty Cobb. And he really did, they were friends. But that's the kind of guy he was. It's sort of amazing. Anyway, the World Series was about to begin. They had all the umpires and the commissioner and they didn't have a commissioner then, but they had presidents of the two leagues, American and National League, got together and went over ground rules, went over the rules for their play, and Germany asked questions. In the event of a tie, do the players get paid for that game? Because the rule, and it carries forward to the present, the first 4 games, the receipts go into a pool and are divided among the players. Not the owners, but the players. It's still true. So you get a bonus by being in the World Series, always. Well, the response was, well, of course. But there's not going to be a tie. What do you mean? So what do you think happened? The second game was into the 10th inning when it got dark, and it was 3-3. So the owners were called in. They reneged. They reneged, as owners are known to do, and he never got it. But Schaefer was the one that called their attention to it. Now, that 3-3 game, you don't know. There were some errors, there were some overthrows that might have been different had they not known this. But anyway, that's part of it. Schaefer grew up in Chicago, and he knew all the watering holes by then. But this is a story about, he was in Chicago and he came into one of these saloons and he saw umpire Jack Sheridan at a table bombed. He had way too much to drink, and he was snoozing. And he also noted, Germany noted, that there was a pipe right next to the table where Sheridan was slumped. And so Germany, being a sort of trickster that he was, went up to the second floor and found where the pipe started and went down. And he cupped his hand and he said, "Jack Sheridan, your time has come. Jack Sheridan, your time has come." Well, Sheridan leaped out and went out the door. And the story is he didn't drink for many, many years. But the next season, Germany came to bat, and Sheridan played umpire. And Germany couldn't resist. He said, "Jack Sheridan, your time has come. You're out!" Threw him out of the game right away. So Germany is still one of my favorites. Okay, here. Oh, what was your favorite nickname or the funniest nickname? I'm just curious about your reactions to these. Yes, ma'am.
Dizzy Dean.
Dizzy Dean. All right. The problem. Yeah. Pardon?
How did he get to be dizzy?
Oh, that's a story. That's a good story, actually. He was in the Army in the 20s. It was his way to get out of stark poverty, actually, because his family were cotton pickers, and they would go from farm to farm picking cotton. They had no home. They just did cotton picking. Excuse me. So Dizzy's in the Army, and he gets KP. And so what do? They find him throwing potatoes at some target in there. And he's doing these kind of bizarre things, because of course he can't read. He doesn't know really how to fit in. But they put him on the baseball team for his division. And he was pitching for the Army team against another team from Houston. And he was into his antics. He'd walk up to the plate and say, "What kind of pitch would you like to strike out with?" and stuff like that. And the opposite team manager said, "Can't you guys get that, hit that dizzy pitcher?" And that's sort of how it began, at least. The trick with Dean is, what's his birth name? Because he would tell the press two different stories. Jerome Herman Dean and J. Hannah Dean. And if you look him up anywhere, you'll get two different birth names for him. Other names that you like. Jim.
John Blue Moon Odom.
John Blue, the late John Blue Moon Odom. I don't know how he got that name. Do you? No. But we could certainly include him. Maybe Finley gave it to him. Who knows? Yeah.
Red Barber.
Red Barber. Oh, he didn't play very much, but he sure did make a name for himself. How many of you listen to Friday mornings on NPR, and Red Barber would be talking from down in Florida and tell you about the flora and fauna or whatever it is of the day, you know? Any other nicknames from the list? Pardon?
How about
Daffy Dean. Well, if you got Dizzy, you got to have Daffy, I suppose. I don't know how he got his name, actually, Jim. I'm just not sure. So.
Reese was Dizzy Dean's broadcasting partner.
Right. An amazingly patient man was Pee Wee. There's a story about Pee Wee and Dizzy going through JFK together. They were probably on a flight to a ball game. And Dizzy had his big old cowboy hat on, which he wore very often. And he's walking through, and people say, "Hi, Diz, how are you?" And his turn to Pee Wee. He said, well, Pee Wee, now you grew up in this area. How come they're always talking to me and not to you? Because he was so arrogant about it, I guess. But anyway, one more shot. Any others?
I enjoyed hearing Dizzy Dean sing the Wabash Mountain and Never Airspace.
Yes. He enjoyed it too, I think. Yeah, the way. I'm sorry? Time's up?
Yeah.
Thank you for telling me. Thank you for coming and enjoying.